One claims it's the company's only chance for survival.
Atari has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The 31-year-old
TWA presents the difference between...
Kodak is filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection.
What's up, guys? My name is Jake, and welcome to the 13th episode of Bankrupt. The cruise industry has been sailing through very choppy waters over the last few years, and it was one of the few industries across the world that was forced to completely shut down all of their revenue streams. Voyages were suspended for months while no money was coming through the door. The giants of the cruise industry, though, like Royal Caribbean and Carnival, had decent cash reserves and spent their time seeking out additional funding and borrowing against their debts to weather the storm. Once cruising resumed in 2021, it seemed as though everyone had made it out alive. That was until early 2022, when reports started coming through that the luxury cruise line Crystal Cruises had their ships arrested by authorities. Prior to this, their parent company declared bankruptcy, and the cruise line was left in an unprecedented state of limbo. Let's find out how this beloved brand got to this point, and investigate how Crystal Cruises became the largest cruise line casualty of our modern time. This episode is sponsored by HelloFresh. Go to HelloFresh.com and use the code BSF16 to get up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. It was 1988, and the NYK Line, a Japanese merchant shipping company, was expanding their industry reach. With their over century-long experience with shipping and collaborations with former executives from Princess Cruises, they wanted to create a brand new, truly luxury cruise experience with bespoke, modern ships that would feel more like a boutique hotel experience while also sailing to hard-to-reach, exotic ports of call. It was a pretty interesting idea, and the only other major cruise line doing anything remotely like this was Seabourn Cruise Line. But they were rather small and not really at the same level of luxury that they had hoped to achieve. All the other players in the space, like Royal Caribbean, Carnival, Premier, and Norwegian, had captured their own wide market share. The now named Crystal Cruises was planned to be something very different. This came to fruition in 1990 when the Crystal Harmony was delivered to Crystal Cruises as their first ship. At 50,000 tons, it would carry just 940 passengers. For comparison, the Carnival Holiday, which was slightly smaller than the Harmony, could carry up to 1,450 passengers. So already a big emphasis was put on the passenger experience. Indeed, this translated to the common spaces, with luxurious fittings harkening back to traditional ocean liners, while also implementing modern technology throughout. The entire design of the ship was in fact pretty modern. At the time, the Harmony also boasted one of the industry's largest standard veranda cabins, as well as many different types of suites. Atop all of this, though, was the quote, Crystal difference. Their high emphasis on customer experience and service. The philosophy of Crystal was to provide guests with an elegant and sophisticated, yet friendly level of service which would strike the right balance with their naturally older North American target demographic. Crystal Harmony was christened in Los Angeles with host Mary Tyler Moore, and soon began voyages to Alaska. Almost immediately, the company exercised its option with the shipyard to build another ship. In 1995, the Crystal Symphony was launched, offering a similar ultra-premium experience and servicing destinations all over the world with voyages exceeding 15 days. Crystal would also later sail world cruises, in some cases exceeding 130-day-long voyages. Over the following 2 decades, Crystal Cruises would win awards of excellence in its luxury travel. Celebrity chefs would sail aboard specialty cruises, and customer satisfaction for the relatively small brand were extremely high. Their customer base grew so loyal that some passengers would buy back-to-back sailings and essentially just live on board. Crystal was making money and became a successful public face for the NYK line, but expansion remained limited. The line would remain in a boutique state through the early 2000s, opting to spend company resources on renovating their aging fleet rather than aggressive expansion. In fact, the company even retired their first vessel, the Crystal Harmony, in 2006. Just 3 years prior, the company had brought on yet another ship called the Crystal Serenity, which sort of replaced the itineraries the Harmony was sailing. Crystal now had just 2 ships and operated as a pretty small player in the industry, even in their own niche. But things were about to drastically change for the company halfway through the 2010s, in a way that would ultimately destroy the beloved cruise line. In 2015, NYK had reached a deal with a Hong Kong-based company which would acquire the Crystal brand. The company was called Genting Hong Kong, which might sound familiar to you as they're the offshoot of the Genting Group, which owns the Resorts World brand, a casino chain which I covered in my Echelon Las Vegas episode of Abandoned. Genting Hong Kong was a separate entity from the main company and controlled all of their cruise line interests. Crystal Cruises was purchased for just $550 million and was part of their master plan for cruise expansion. Genting already had a decent stake in the American company Norwegian Cruise Lines, had their own Asian-based Star Cruises which utilized Norwegian's ship designs, and by the later half of 2015 announced a new company called Dream Cruises, an upscale cruise line also based in Asia. The company then purchased controlling shares in a shipyard in Germany called MV Werften, so clearly their commitments and ambitions were high. This of course would translate to their newly acquired American-based Crystal Cruises as well. Alright, so this is where things start to get out of hand. So in the same year of its acquisition, Crystal purchased a small and pretty old expedition yacht and called it the Crystal E-Spirit. They also announced plans for a large multi-vessel expansion into river cruising, buying one older river ship and placing orders for several more brand new ones planned to launch in 2017. Crystal also announced 3 new massive expedition cruise ships. They would be called the Exclusive Class and would carry 1,000 people, gross more than 100,000 tons, and feature all-suite cabins. It would also include a deck for private residences encompassing 48 apartment-like cabins which you could buy. This was pretty ambitious, and per their order, these ships could be delivered as soon as 2018. If you remember back to my SS United States video, this was the same time when Crystal announced they would be exploring the idea of turning the abandoned ocean liner into a cruise ship, something that of course never materialized. On top of all of this, they announced plans for a luxury air travel division with the purchase of a Bombardier Global Express XRS, plus an order of a Boeing 777-200LR and a 787 Dreamliner. By the next year, the company signed even more agreements to build the world's first expedition yacht. Yeah, so Crystal was going from a cruise line that had just 2 ships to, within the year of its acquisition, announcing they would quadruple their number of ships in less than 5 years. Expansion at this scale ate up billions of dollars in capital and showed that Genting had high aspirations for this ultra-luxury brand. To their credit though, despite this immense growth and clear goals of expanding their market share, the customer experience largely stayed the same. The brand continued to be known for their excellent experiences and won various critic awards because of it. Maybe all of this large growth would have left little growing pains. However, they then began to walk things back. In 2018, the company didn't end up taking delivery of their shiny new 100,000-ton cruise ship. Instead, it was announced they would be scaling the project down rather significantly. Renamed to the Diamond class, these ocean-going vessels were scaled down to nearly half the size of the originals, with a familiar design and this time no permanent residences. This was the first sign of the realities of Crystal's future. Through this time, the company took delivery of an additional 4 river ships as well as their 777 and 787 aircrafts. That aspect of the business was rather strange. Just that 777 alone cost over $400 million, which, remember, was almost the same price that Genting bought the entire Crystal brand for. A legacy brand plus 2 enormous cruise ships for almost the price of 1 plane. Regardless, along with private charters, their fleet aircraft would embark on what they called sky cruises, flying guests around the world on one curated journey. It's a cool idea and a very unique experience, except the starting price was over $140,000 a person. So you gotta ask yourself how many people were actually utilizing this ultra luxury vacation. Though, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it is slightly cheaper than the other products like the Four Seasons private jet. Over on the cruise side of the business, their ships were beginning to look a bit tired. They hadn't been refitted since the early 2000s, and with prices that started around $3,200 per person for a typical 7-night voyage, it was still a very premium price to pay. Now, I know some would argue that these interiors would perhaps align a little more with their clientele, but at the same time, their ships were simply not as nice as their competitors. Cruise lines like the immensely successful Viking cruises and the luxurious French line Ponant all made good progress with diversifying their customer base. I don't think anyone below the age of 60 was choosing to travel aboard Crystal. Their future market share wasn't looking so good. Over at Genting Hong Kong, their finances were also not looking very promising. Remember, along with Crystal, they also own Dream and Star Cruises. Dream was also being thrusted into a massive expansion. They announced plans and soon commenced construction on an absolutely enormous 208,000-ton mega cruise ship called the Global Dream, which would weigh in just shy of the existing world's largest cruise ship. But unlike Royal Caribbean's Wonder of the Seas with its 6,900 maximum passengers, Global Dream, which is smaller, would carry an egregious 9,500 passengers. Apart from it also being very ugly, the ship seemed to have pretty blatantly copied Royal Caribbean's design, but just made it worse. Perhaps I only see it that way because it's tailored for a different market. Regardless, GHK was spending around 1.3 billion euros to construct it, and this meant Genting was taking out a hefty amount of debt in order to fund these expansion efforts, not only for Dream Cruises, but for Crystal too. So for several years, the company had continuously lost money. Despite revenues exceeding $1.5 billion in 2019, the company still lost over $150 million, and I bet you can see where this is going from here. With the dawn of the 2020 pandemic and the subsequent halt of all cruise ship operations, Genting Hong Kong and its 3 cruise line brands were caught in a deadly position. Suddenly, all of their existing ships and planes, new build orders, and a massive shipyard were just sitting around. The company reported a staggering $1.7 billion loss by the end of that year. They also had over $3 billion in active loans. In response to the pandemic, the company announced they would be halting all payments for these loans in order to keep cash on hand to see them through this tough time. Crystal, in the meantime, continued work on their long-awaited expedition ship and publicly stated that, quote, "We are not going out of business," which was in response to a sluggish stock price and worries that the company might fold. By 2021, Genting HK continued losing insane amounts of money, just as Crystal returned back to service by that summer. Their expedition ship, the Crystal Endeavour, also finally set sail in July, it being their first non-river ship to enter the fleet since 2003. The Endeavour is a rather cool vessel with some gorgeous and luxurious interiors paired with some really unique toys and tech. It does, however, feature their parent company's influence, with prices starting around $17,000 per person for a 10-night Icelandic voyage. But despite this, there's a Resorts World casino on board. It's actually the only expedition ship in the world to have a casino, as if their passengers hadn't given them enough money already. Regardless, the service was praised, and it looked like Crystal's future might actually be bright after all. That was until January 2022. It began on the 10th as the MV Werften and Lloyd Werft shipyards, which Genting HK owned, had filed for insolvency. Since nobody was ordering cruise ships anymore, their operations were stagnated and they just ran out of money. But then, just 9 days later, Genting Hong Kong announced they had exhausted all options with creditors and would be filing for bankruptcy themselves, effective immediately. The same day, Crystal Cruises announced they would be suspending all operations until April 2022, when they believed they would be able to assess the extent of their bankruptcy. Their last cruises in operation would conclude on January 30th. However, something unexpected, at least to the public, then happened. On the 22nd of January, a judge in Miami issued an arrest warrant for the Crystal Symphony, which is apparently something that can happen. It was revealed that Crystal and Star Cruises had failed to pay fuel expenses worth around $4.6 million. Some of those fuel bills had gone unpaid from as far back as 2017. So the petrol company had sued Crystal Cruises in US court, thus allowing the judge to essentially order a repossession of the cruise ships. So, in fear of being met at an American port by US Marshals, Crystal sailed both the Symphony and Serenity to the Bahamas to disembark passengers. The guests on board just prior were met with this announcement by the captain.
The ship has been placed under arrest by the local authorities over some unpaid bills. And as bad as it sounds, it's actually a quite good thing to happen. So some unfortunate news, but it was actually quite expected. So thank you for this and until later.
Unfortunately, this is the end of Crystal Cruises, and we don't know what's going to happen. I think the ships are for sale, and until then, we ship will be our managing company.
Passengers were ferried back to the US from the Bahamas, and soon after, both ships were arrested and seized by officials in early February. At that point, only crew were on board, but still, a rather annoying system was set up for passengers to get refunds. However, many had to result in calling their banks pleading for restitution. It's estimated that Crystal Cruises owes over $100 million to customers, people who had booked cruises well into 2024. Now with voyages that are unlikely to happen. That brings us to now, with a Florida court allowing a third-party entity to handle the liquidation of the Crystal brand. Really, this whole thing is pretty insane when you really think about it. It's been decades since the bankruptcy of a major cruise line. The last one I can remember is, of course, Premier Cruise Line. The industry typically has pretty good margins, and when managed right, can be a hugely profitable venture. So it's no surprise why Genting Hong Kong wanted a piece of each market segment, from an Asian-based budget and luxury product to the ultra-luxury boutique-style line servicing North America and Europe that they bought into. But instead of focusing on one aspect of these businesses, they were on a loan-based spending spree, ordering one of the world's largest cruise ships, building out a river cruise fleet, a stupidly expensive air service brand, a purchase agreement for an abandoned ocean liner, plus ordering a consistently changing class of ships for Crystal. What's even more insane is that while those large Diamond-class ships never got built, the one vessel from these original plans that did, the Crystal Endeavor, cost the company $200 million to build, but it was only in service for 7 months before the brand folded. It's just such an enormous waste. Their parent company had been losing money for a while already, in the pursuit of more market share and at the expense of short-term losses. With literally billions of dollars in debt, the effects of the pandemic absolutely destroyed their revenue streams. Realistically, the only avenue they were going to be able to make payments for those loans. In just over 5 years, the company purchased Crystal Cruises, announced all of these crazy new plans, followed through with some of them, and absolutely burned down their entire company from debt, overambition, and an inability to prepare for anything but smooth sailing. It's too early to say what will come of these assets they do have floating around, but there are already talks of selling the half-built global dream ship to a large American player. But so far, nothing has come of it. According to Crystal's former CEO, Gentine had, quote, effectively washed their hands of Crystal when they filed for liquidation in Bermuda. At that point, our relationship with Gentine was effectively severed, and we were cut loose to fend for ourselves. What's even more suspicious is that apparently several companies expressed interest in purchasing Crystal even as late as 2021. If Gentine was truly cash hungry and were able to sell such a valuable asset, then why didn't they? Well, that's a bit of a mystery right now, though some have speculated their timing of the bankruptcy was suspicious, and that it was deliberate to use Crystal as their pawn in reorganization. Whatever the case may be, the assets of Crystal will likely be split apart and sold individually, effectively dissolving the company for good. With other brands like Seabourn, Regent, Viking, and Ponant all jumping at the opportunity to grab up those valuable customers and market share. In the end, it all came down to bad luck and poor management. A series of events that on the surface seemed like a bright future for a beloved brand, but in reality were just the right mixture for disaster and ultimately led to not only the first luxury cruise line brand, but the first major cruise line bankruptcy in decades. This episode has been made possible by HelloFresh. In a constant and perpetual effort to cut down on food waste and make my life easier while cooking, HelloFresh has been a perfect way to prepare fresh food I would have never attempted making myself. Today, I'm making the Italian-inspired beef burgers. They were of course delicious, and it was just one of the many top-of-the-line recipes which require little prep time and dishes to wash afterwards. Plus, since HelloFresh sends you pre-portioned ingredients, I'm not wasting money on food I don't even end up using. If you're unlike me and actually attempt to live a healthy life, there's also a wide variety of veggie, pescatarian, and fit and wholesome meals to enjoy. If you want to try HelloFresh for yourself, you can get up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts by going to HelloFresh.com and using the code BSF16. Anyway guys, my name is Jake, and thank you very much for watching.